Capital Hoops. Today I am joined by Alpha Bangura, Alpha PG County legend, perhaps someone call him. Definitely a tremendous basketball player in your day at Eleanor Roosevelt. Went on to play at Monmouth and St. John's.
Right.
Played in the NBA, or played for various NBA teams, which we'll get into, and then had a pretty successful career overseas that ended recently. But I know we've been talking off camera a little bit, and you've told me about a lot of things that you've done, kind of doors that have opened up because of basketball, which we'll get into. I know you're involved with Durant in some capacity right now. You're training kids, but it seems like you've got a lot of doors open. Seems like you got a lot of stuff going on right now in your life, which is great. So I guess let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing, where you grew up, and then kind of the high school days at ER.
So I grew up in Cheverly, Maryland. And so, of course, I had no previous knowledge of the documentary. I didn't know it was coming out. But, of course, when I saw Cheverly, my antennas went up right away. When I saw, I think, some of the images of the young kids in front of the Cheverly sign. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a nostalgic type of person. Like I love to talk about old memories, and I'm sentimental in that way. And so I'm always talking about Cheverly and just my experiences there, the way it shaped me and defined me as a person, as a player. I didn't actually pick up a basketball seriously. And when I say seriously, meaning being on a team until I was 14.
Wow.
So, well, I grew up, my family originally is from Sierra Leone. And so, I came to this country when I was 5.
Okay.
So we had no previous, family members who were basketball players, no cousins, no uncles, anything like that. And so growing up in that neighborhood, every time someone played a sport, for the most part, all the kids kind of played that sport as well. We did a lot of things as a community. And so football was the primary sport that I really loved initially. As any young boy, you love that aggression, being able to tackle people and things like that. Wasn't too much of a fan of basketball. And I think that, like many young people, when you see Michael Jordan play, it's just, something really captivating about that. And not having that background, after seeing him, I said, that's something I want to do. And so I picked up a ball in the neighborhood, played a little bit. And then once I started to see a lot of my friends register for this, Cheverly team, I ended up signing up, and we went 14-0 my first year. And so from there, I went on to play with PG Jaguars.
Okay.
Where I believe Kevin played with PG Jaguars also, and a lot of other players from the area. One of the most, I think, important organizations in the area due to the amount of people that, they help. Had I been in any other organization starting off, I don't think I would have been, I wouldn't have made it this far, because I think they had just collectively great temperament for young people. The expectations weren't unrealistic, and you really had some good people there, like, Miss Tillman, PK, Larry, guys that were just Coach Bob, people who I think genuinely cared about kids. And I was fortunate to be a part of PG Jaguars at that age. And, once I got on that AAU team, I never looked back. And I ended up going to Eleanor Roosevelt and started my high school career there.
So what year did you get to Roosevelt? What year did you graduate high school?
I got to Roosevelt in 94, and I graduated in 98.
Okay. So tell me about your career there, and when, just so people have a kind of a point of reference, when did Glenn Farello start at Roosevelt?
So when I got to Roosevelt, the head coach at the time was a guy named Mark Hurt. He was from Indiana, and I think that Coach Bob Lanier, who was a coach at Oxon Hill for a long time, was our assistant coach, and he was a coach at JV. Not too long after me getting there, Coach Lanier left. I want to say he left maybe after my sophomore year, and Coach Farello came my sophomore year, maybe either in the beginning of the season or in the end of the season. I don't really remember, but it was in 95, I believe, when he first got
right. And Billy Lanier went to Oxon Hill then, right? Because I know They played in that 5 overtime state championship in '98.
Exactly.
Okay, okay.
So
I got you.
I don't even want to talk about that because they beat us. Mike Sweetney
Yep.
and the rest of those guys. But,
Yep.
Roosevelt, prior to me, getting there, I respect all of the guys that lace them up and play hard. It was a school that it had a lot of students there, so you could almost expect that you find talent. But, we didn't have a culture at the time. I think, the school was pretty low in rankings. Locally, of course, if you're not ranked locally, you're not going to be ranked, outside of the state. So, I really didn't know what to expect initially, but I got there with a lot of young players who were really talented, and I was optimistic that we were going to, eventually have a pretty good team, because some of the guys that I ended up, going to school with were guys that I played against that first year that I played basketball as a 14-year-old for Chevrolet. And so, Farello got there at a time, and, I think we really needed him because, Mark Hurt was a great guy, but he didn't care too much about AAU. It wasn't something that he didn't want to deal with all of the circus that can come with AAU basketball. And Farello, being a young guy, he was perfect for us because we could relate to him a lot more. Mm-hmm. And I think he had just finished playing overseas for maybe 2 years. He was in Europe. I think he was off of an injury, and he and I used to, shoot around and play a lot. And that's how he and I got really close, because he was just by nature, he's a gym rat, just like myself. And so he coached our summer league games, and that's how he and I developed a relationship. He would take me to practice. He would, take me home after practice. Any extra work that I did, he was in there with me. And I think there was a point where he was considering going back to Ohio, and he ended up staying because he felt an obligation to me, to make sure that I got to the gym, because, unfortunately for me, again, I didn't have a family that was really into sports like that. And so I wasn't able to get to practice without getting a ride or walking. Sometimes I just walk. So that's kind of how Farello got to Roosevelt. And, that's the early part of how we started to build a relationship.
So you're at Roosevelt for 4 years, and then what happens from Roosevelt?
Well, so, I was at Roosevelt for 3 years, and then I transferred to Notre Dame Academy in Virginia it wasn't even a year.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you had guys like Ed Hoffman, who used to be at St. John's Prospect Hall. He left St. John's Prospect Hall and started Notre Dame Academy with myself, Curtis Washington, Tim Washington, Jamal Gilchrist, Fred Primus, Stefan Bacali, Val Brown. Val Brown was our point guard. I mean, we had a ridiculous mob. And so
this is the same Notre Dame that Beasley ended up going to. Yeah?
I didn't know Beasley was there. When did Beasley get there?
I'm pretty sure Beasley went to – it might have been a different Notre Dame. Didn't Beasley go to a Notre Dame for 1 year or part of a year? I'm pretty sure he had a stint in high school. I could be wrong about that. I'll have to go back and check that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
We were in was it Middleburg, Virginia? That's okay. Where it was. And so okay. I went there, and then I came back to Roosevelt, and my senior season had already started. I came almost halfway through.
Okay.
And so a lot of people mentioned, well, that's why you didn't make, All Met, or you didn't make the Capital Classics, because you were gone for half of the season. And when I came back, I want to say it may have been like the end of December or mid-December. And so, from Roosevelt, I had poor SAT scores initially, and I had some mid-majors, a few high majors that showed interest, but I just did horrible in that SAT. And then when I finally took it a second time, a lot of those schools came back trying to recruit me. But at that point, I wanted to stay loyal to some of the schools that were consistent in recruiting me, despite knowing what my SAT scores was. and I ended up, going to Monmouth. But one of the cool things about going to Monmouth for me was my best friend at the time, who was currently my best friend, he was going to parlayed. Real good basketball player, Aaron Faulkner. And once he was done, I think he was set to go to Bucknell. And Bucknell, they don't give scholarships. And so I told the guys in Monmouth, listen, if you give my best friend a scholarship and he can really play, I'll come to Monmouth. And the rest is history. They gave him a scholarship, and he and I went off to college together to play.
That's pretty cool. So you're at Monmouth for 1 year?
I was at Monmouth for 1 year. I got newcomer of the year there. I was second in the nation in scoring for freshmen, and I think I shot about 58% from the field. I had a pretty good freshman year, and the guy who I ended up going there with, Kevin Nickelberry, he left, and I went there because he was going there. That would be his first year coaching there. So once he was leaving, for me, I just I wanted to leave with him, and he kind of said, look, we got to leave, and that's how I ended up going to St. John's.
So you sit out a year when you transfer?
Yep, I had a redshirt year in my first year. So I was there with guys like Eric Barkley, LeVar Postel, Lucy Thornton, and those guys.
Okay, and then tell me about St. John's. Obviously, I remember you from St. John's because I was at Syracuse during that time.
Yeah.
And I remember the Big East very, very vividly then. But how was St. John's for you?
St. John's, initially was a great experience. It wasn't too far from home. I actually picked them over University of Maryland, where, just in hindsight, I wish I'd have stayed home and went to Maryland. But I ended up going to St. John's because I was interested in music production as well as playing basketball. A lot of the staff and different people who were a part of the St. John's staff and organization had a lot of great connections. Malik Sealy, for example, God rest his soul, he owned a studio called Baseline Studios. And so because of that, a lot of the players, would spend time in the studio, and we had access to it. And this was early on when, Rockefeller and Jay-Z and those guys were recording, in that studio. And so for a young 19-year-old, I was completely starstruck. And because this was something I wanted to do, I was really sort of motivated and inspired to go to the school, knowing that I could play high-level basketball and still pursue, music production. So that's sort of what really sold me on going there.
And then did something go wrong? I mean, you said in hindsight you wish you were going to Maryland. What was there an issue with St. John's?
Yeah, I mean, so when I got to St. John's, competition to me was really a non-issue. I still played at a really high level. What I didn't really understand as a young person is, when you go to these different schools or when you're deciding on what school to go to, it's important that you have an advocate there. Mm-hmm. You don't want to just go to a school based on your belief in yourself alone. That's not going to be enough. You need to be able to go somewhere where, as a young teenager, if you make mistakes, you're going to have people who are able to, see through those mistakes and not hold it against you to the point where your career is completely railroaded due to, things that can easily be resolved or fixed. Now, I never got in any trouble at St. John's. The issue for me was I wasn't being rewarded for the amount of work that I was putting in. And what I found out later was, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that if a guy is getting a head coaching job and he's from another state, there's always going to be an assistant coach that's from that state on staff. And most times, those guys' primary responsibility will be to recruit local players, because St. John's was getting a reputation that New York players were no longer interested in coming there. They were going to all of these different schools, and so they wanted to change that. So one of the assistant coaches who was with Riverside Church, he ended up being the assistant there at St. John's, and they had an agenda to really boost the New York players and sort of get them interested in coming back there. And just me, I was just at the wrong place at the wrong time, you know.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of what happened with me.
Gotcha. So St. John's wraps up, and I know then you enter the professional ranks. I know you had a bunch of different stops on the professional scene.
Yeah.
Tell me about, highlight some of those.
So when I left St. John's, I was lost. You know, it was a really rough period for me because I left early, and obviously I left under circumstances that I hadn't imagined, you know, I would have to deal with. And so I just needed a little bit of time to kind of get my head together. And I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go professional. I'm going to take the long route. And I ended up playing in the U.S.A.
Okay.
So I was playing with Brooklyn Kings, and Terrence Mullen, who's Chris Mullen's younger brother, was one of the assistant coaches there. And so he and I had a pretty good relationship. You know, I played with them, averaged about 13 my first year out. And then from there, I think I tried out for the Wizards maybe my first year after Brooklyn Kings, didn't make the team, and then I ended up in the D-League. And this early stages of the D-League, maybe 2003, going on 2004. I played with the Charleston Low Gators, and that was when the D-League was, you know, everybody in the D-League at that time could have been 8, 9, 10 man on an NBA bench.
Right, right.
So a lot of competition. So I spent a lot of time between the D-League, CBA, and then I would go overseas and just kind of come back and forth, still trying to make the NBA.
And I know we talked off camera a little bit. You started really embracing your surroundings when you went overseas. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but
Yeah.
It seems like you really took advantage of the opportunities of being in different cultures and being around, you know, different people that had different stuff going on. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the thing about going overseas for me initially was just a no-no. You know, I had a lot of really good offers that I didn't realize were great offers until I actually went. So just as an example, you get an offer for $275K, but you're so locked in about playing in the NBA, you're thinking, I don't care about that money. Because as a young person, you only know about having either several $100s or you hear about millions of dollars. You don't hear about 500,000 and what that can do for you, or 100,000 and what that can do for you. You have no concept of that whatsoever. And so whenever, you know, I would get these offers, I would just decline them immediately. You know, I'm not interested. I'm going to stay here. And so finally I took a job overseas. And when I got paid and saw all of that money and realized what I could do with it, I was just like, what the hell have I been doing this whole time? You know, I should have went a long time ago.
How long did it take you to like get to that point?
I think, you know, I did about 2 or 3 strong years of the minor leagues without going overseas.
Okay.
And then what I would do is after the All-Star break, halfway through the season, I'd wait, and it would always be, look, you're next to get a call up. You're probably one that's going to, you know, get a call up, because in every minor league situation I was in, I was either top 3 in scoring my last year, or when I played in the CBA, I averaged 30 in the CBA, and I was the top scorer there. So, you know, in terms of just production, you know, I always did well, but you realize that playing in the NBA is about fitting into a good, you know, team and them actually needing your services. And your services may not be to score. They may not need you to score. And so if you at that present time can't offer something different, then you're not going to make that team. It doesn't matter how talented you are. It's just like saying, you know, I have a sedan, but I need a truck. If you're not a truck, I can't buy you. I don't need you. Even though, you know, I like the fact that you are, the best looking sedan I've ever seen, but I don't need it. I need a truck now. And so that's kind of how the NBA is. You have guys who are talented, they're skilled, but it's not enough jobs. And sometimes, it's just not going to work out for you unless you're in the perfect situation. And so I embraced going overseas once I realized that, one, I could make money. Two, I could still come back and try and make the NBA. And three, I was going to get a chance to travel and see the world, meet people, really be submerged in different cultures. And that's what I did. I took full advantages of the different places I went to, and I started to see how manufacturing really works. Being here in America, whatever we purchase, we pay for it and then we take it home. You don't see everything that kind of comes with that process. And so when I started to spend a lot of time in Asia, China, the Philippines, and places like that, I started to meet people who were in manufacturing and going to the different, manufacturing companies and plants and things like that. And so, you start thinking, damn, I spend so much money buying all of these different things. I have hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000 pairs of shoes. I have this, I have that, but no one's buying anything from me. I was the kid that, I would have Starburst as a elementary school kid, and I would, sell each of them. So I think I always had that spirit to want to make money and find different ways to make money. But sort of what you and I talked about off camera, a lot of it is lacking exposure, not having the right people sort of help you get into these spaces that you may dream about, but you just wouldn't know, like, what are the first steps that I take if I wanted to manufacture this? What is manufacturing? Like, what exactly is it? What's the process? Like those things, like you mentioned, when you don't have those answers, sometimes it can be discouraging. And so some people are a little bit more resilient and they push through until they, find the answers that they need. And some people just kind of give up and, their ideas die with them. And so what I tell people is, as a basketball player, making it as a pro is like winning the lottery. And so whether you're in the NBA or overseas, you're still in that 1%. And so if you have the ability to become a professional basketball player, there should be nothing else that you can't do. So when I talk to, young players and they have sort of, some issues with their self-esteem, because the reality is players are very confident on the court. When you get them off the court, that's when you really kind of see who they are. And so for me, I tell them a lot of times that the same work ethic that you put in as a basketball player, all of that stuff is transferable to real life. So if you decide you want to build robots tomorrow, you absolutely can do that. You just need to find someone who's already building robots, ask them as many questions as possible. The same way as a player, you should ask your coach, what should I do to get better? Am I doing this well? Am I not doing that well? You take that same approach and you apply it to anything else, and it's just no way you can't be successful. And so I've been manufacturing now for about 12 years, or in manufacturing, but now I have my own operation where I do the manufacturing in-house, have all the equipment that I need to do that. And prior to that, I was outsourcing, finding different people who, after a while, were reliable to be able to get some work done for me. But now, for the most part, I do most of it myself. And, without playing basketball and going overseas, I probably would have never been in this position.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think a lot of people that think about playing professional basketball only think about the basketball, and they don't think about the doors that going overseas can open up.
Right.
And I think a lot of people should really take that to heart. Like, if you get a professional contract overseas, utilize that contract. Just like they say, if you get a scholarship, like, you want to go to college and not have to pay for it. Well, if you get to play pro basketball, like, ride the coattails of the pro basketball and let that open doors for you, because at some point the basketball is going to stop bouncing. So I think that's a very important, something very important that you've really utilized, and I admire you for that.
No.
So tell me a little bit now about what you've been doing basketball wise since the professional basketball has ended? I know you train kids. I know you have some affiliation with Team Durant, but what are your basketball obligations look like these days?
So, I'm still training kids. And I'm just, so I had a basketball management company in 2009. And so, it was a bit odd because as a player, most of the time, you're not going to see anybody taking on those, type of, task or that type of undertaking while you're still playing.
For those who don't know what that means, tell us exactly what that means by a management company.
Okay, so you have people who are agents, and then you have people who are managers. And so an agent, a lot of times they're primarily responsible for getting you a contract and making sure your contract looks the way it's supposed to look, all of just, the legal terms, making sure all that stuff is on point. A manager may look over the contract, but he ultimately will hand it over to the agent. He's going to be more responsible for getting you different kind of opportunities, helping you to kind of diversify and basically capitalize off of your likeness, your image, and things of that nature. And based on the type of opportunities that manager gets you, he gets paid a certain percentage for those different things that he's able to, basically help you get.
Got it. Okay. So you start a management company while you're an active player.
Yep.
You're representing guys that you play with or that are in different countries, or guys that are from PG that you knew from back in the day, or what?
Yep. So I literally started it because when you go to certain countries and play, most of the time that team may want you to return, especially if you didn't get in any trouble, you didn't cause them any major issues and you played well. They'll offer you an opportunity to come back. But if you play really well, you'll get opportunities in other countries, and the salary, offer will be a lot better. And so what I would do is say, look, I'm not going to come back, but I know someone who I think you'll really like. That just kind of came from a spirit of wanting to help people and wanting to sort of look out for guys that I knew. And you always know who's playing and who isn't playing. And so, I would recommend certain guys. And then I realized, like, I can get paid to do this. Like, even though some of these guys are my friends, I should still get some compensation for this. And so I started to facilitate different opportunities for players. And one of the bigger and more notable things I did, and did it right here out of Peachey County, was I had an opportunity to go play for the Libyan national team. And I played in a championship, a tournament called the Arab Championships. After I left Japan and won a championship there, I went over to the Middle East for the first time, and my team lost in the championship, but I got MVP of this tournament. And I had just about every team or every country in the Middle East offering me a passport to play as a local when they try and, compete internationally. And so I chose Libya because the salary that they offered me was just impossible to walk away from. But I also had the privilege to bring, guys on board with me. So at that time, my management company was official. I had a childhood friend of mine go take the test in Geneva, Switzerland. I told him, I said, look, take the test or study for the test, rather. I'm going to fly you to Geneva, Switzerland to take this test.
What test are you alluding to?
This is the FIBA, the test for basically being a licensed agent.
Okay.
With FIBA.
Gotcha.
And since as a player, I couldn't be an agent, I wanted to stay on the managerial side. But a lot of the agents would tell. They say, this guy is signing players and he's signing coaches and he's playing. He can't do that. So I said, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to send my friend to go get this license. He'll be the face, he'll be the agent, and I'll facilitate everything. And so he went, he passed the test, came back, we got our license, and we just continued doing what we were doing. And so when I had this opportunity in Libya, they told me, they said, look, we're trying to, really build our team up. This was when Gaddafi was still alive. None of that tension that eventually happened in the country, none of that was going on. And so I went there first as a player who they gave a passport to, and within months, I hired, they gave me a general manager position while I was playing. So I hired Kevin Nickelberry, who was my assistant coach at Monmouth. My brother, who at the time was coaching with Coach Farello, he came over as the head assistant, and we had another third assistant, and I hired Lamar Butler, who went to Oxon Hill. Yeah. He came over there with us. Randy Holcomb, Mike Scott, Jermaine Tate, Hiram Fuller, all guys that I played with throughout my career or played against that I had pretty good relationships with. The whole objective was to help build this national team up so that they'd be able to compete in the future World Games or whatever the case may be. And so I was really privileged to be able to play and assist them in building, this team up. And it was actually in the Washington Post back in 2009, 2010. But that's one of the biggest things that I'm proud of. And that's some of the things that I do with the management company.
So is the management company still in operation, or what happened? What was?
Yeah. My friend was going through some personal things and he needed to kind of regroup. And so I wanted to focus on playing because, it did get to a point where I would have so many players would just call me or send me messages and say, Al, I heard you got so-and-so a job. Can you get me a job? And it got to a point where, I couldn't balance playing and doing that without my friend's help. And so I shut it down. And the last thing I attempted to do, I was actually in the Philippines, and I saw that Kobe Bryant had become the spokesperson for Turkish Airlines. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to try to get LeBron to be the spokesperson for Philippines Airlines. Now, a good friend of mine, Derek Tarver, he was really close with Maverick Carter, who was LeBron's business partner and friend. And so I reached out to Derek and I told him, I said, look, I know the guy who owns Philippines Airline, and I want to see if we can get LeBron to be a spokesperson for them, just like Kobe is doing with Turkish Airlines. And so we set up the meeting. Everything was looking great, and the Philippines Airlines went on strike, and it just killed the whole entire deal. So once that happened, I kind of slowed things down, and then I picked it back up about 4 months ago. I started it back up because, again, just throughout the years, I've had multiple people contact me and say, look, I got this kid, he can play. I know this kid, he can do this and that. And so, I've experienced everything a basketball player could possibly experience overseas, all of the highs, all of the lows. I thoroughly understand the contracts very well. I've had to sue in FIBA court 2 or 3 times. I've won every time. And so when I got there, I made sure that I educated myself. I didn't just play. And I spent a lot of time, as I mentioned earlier, learning about manufacturing, learning about different things that people do that make them successful over there, and seeing how I could bring that back here in the States and sort of utilize it. But just from a basketball standpoint, I know the countries that are paying. I know the countries that aren't paying. I know the organizations that you need to just stay the hell away from. It's been almost 20 years over there. So because I retired recently, I was going to play in the Big Three last summer. Things didn't work out with that. So now that's just kind of what I do. Aside from the manufacturing, I train guys and just kind of help them develop. And, I try to just help players who really just don't know what to do once they leave college and maybe their coach wasn't giving them the push that they feel like they deserve. I just try to help guys like that. So I'm involved in a lot of different things, but there are things that I'm really passionate about. And so, I don't really consider it work.
This documentary came out on Friday. Everybody has an opinion on this documentary.
Sure.
As someone who, was a high-level player in PG County, played overseas, played at the highest level collegiately, I'd love to hear your take on in the water basketball accounting.
I think that it was a good documentary. I think that everything has to have context. And a lot of people weigh in on it without proper context. But at the end of the day, you know, people are entitled to having their opinion. I think that it's such a broad conversation that, as I mentioned earlier, you can't cover everything. And you can't even expect that it's their obligation to tell someone else's story, right? But at the same time, that story does belong to a lot of different people. I'm someone who, because I spent so much time overseas, if you don't know me personally, or, you know, you're not someone who is actually following basketball internationally, you'll probably go like, I haven't seen that guy in a while. Like, where is he? What's up with him? And so, you know, there are times I would come home in the summer and times I wouldn't. And so, you know, I would always hear conversations about who, you know, people thought were the better players to come out of the area, who did this and who did that. And I kind of stayed away from the conversation because, quite frankly, because I was gone, I didn't know some of these young players. I didn't know what they were doing, so I couldn't give an opinion on it. I just knew that basketball had changed a lot from when I was playing, you know, to now. And so I had my opinions about that. But, you know, as far as the documentary, I think that those guys told their story. Every single one of them that was in it, well-deserved recognition. You know, guys that I think all of them at one point were underdogs, and they all made some really big names for themselves. So, you know, I respect where they are, what they're doing. But, you know, when I weighed in on it, I just feel like you can't talk about PG County basketball and not talk about Eleanor Roosevelt. You know, Eleanor Roosevelt is, I believe, ranked third in the state of Maryland for the most wins or something like that. You know, Eleanor Roosevelt has the second most pros to come out of that school behind DeMatha. You know, we have a really rich history. And I say this with all humility, it wasn't like that before I got there. You know, when I got to Roosevelt, guys played hard, guys played the right way, but the talent level just wasn't the best. And so my time there and the work that I put in there, you know, when I left Roosevelt, I led PG County in scoring. I was either first or second in the state of Maryland for scoring. You know, we had guys like Delonte Holland who came, who actually played with me, who put in some serious work, who played 12 years overseas. We had Eddie Baston, who did some great things at UNC Charlotte, played with the Bulls. Delonte West, who everyone knows about. Gordon Calabria, you know, Vic. You know, we had a lot of guys that played overseas and that played well. And so for me, it wasn't about saying, look, you guys should have talked about Roosevelt. It's expounding upon that conversation and saying, look, Roosevelt made some serious noise and they're still, you know, very consistent in producing really good players. But I think that there's also this perception that Roosevelt just, you know, got really good in these last maybe, you know, 8 to 10 years, and that's just not true. When Coach Farello got there, if you look at The Last Dance, and not to compare, of course, Roosevelt to that, but when you look at having the right pieces as players, but you also got to have the right pieces as coaches. And so when Farello took over coaching, you really saw that, okay, this school is definitely turning the corner. They're making a name for themselves, and that's just something that I think we've done, and we haven't historically gotten the credit for it. And a lot of the conversations about who's supposed to be the best players and who's supposed to, you know, have accomplished this and that. Well, for me, what I tell people is this: whether I'm in your circle, whether I'm in your crew or your clique, or whatever the case may be, it doesn't change the history. It doesn't change, you know, the facts of what actually happened. I don't think there's another player or there was a player prior to me at Roosevelt who played major D1 basketball. And it was definitely not another player who was a professional prior to me. You know, to me, these are like significant milestones. And I think when you start having conversations about guys who contributed and you use this as your formula or your barometer to sort of judge what you think is high level, but then you kind of skip over names, I got to question what your intent or what your motives are for that. And so that's not so much so about the documentary. It's about just all of the conversation that I think people in the area have about who's a good player, who isn't, and you hear names of guys who, beyond high school didn't really do much. And so I guess I get confused trying to figure out, what's the criteria here that you guys are basing it on? So overall, though, the documentary was great. I think Kevin is the best player to ever come out of this area, hands down. I mean, I don't even think that's debatable. Not only is he a great player, he's a great basketball mind. And all of those guys who were in that documentary all deserve that type of acknowledgement. But again, in having all of these different conversations about who did what, to not mention me or to not mention Roosevelt, I just think that either you're not informed or maybe some biases there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, everyone has their own opinion on this. I mean, it would be great if someone decided they wanted to kind of expand on this and make a series of some sort. I know the guys who directed this documentary, and they spent 3 years of their life doing it. And Showtime didn't enter the fray until pretty late in the game. And when Showtime enters, like, they have things that they got boxes that they need to be checked. They need this to have mass appeal.
Yeah.
They need dudes in the NBA so that everyone who's not in DC who's watching this can relate to it. So their ratings are good. So
you can't have a show like that and talk about guys that aren't known on the mainstream. If you pay homage to guys who aren't, that's something that's always going to be honorable. But I totally agree with you. You're going to highlight guys that are known. Showtime doesn't care about what Alpha Bangura did as a freshman or as a sophomore. And so that's something I'm very, clear on. So the documentary just opened up more dialogue to expound upon, the history of PG County, because this is something that, I shared some posts that are 3 years old. Again, just being that super nostalgic person, I'm always talking about, man, I just love that I grew up in PG County. Yeah. I love that, this is where I call home. I've always been just a big supporter of home. And so to obviously see this come into fruition, just talking about PG County as a whole, and for people who are not from here, they're still going to look at it as DC, Maryland, Virginia. So everyone is going to get some attention from this. So I think it was a great documentary from that standpoint specifically. I'm just glad that it opened up some dialogue for some other conversation.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think it definitely opened up dialogue. The timing of it coming out, why a lot of people are kind of, isolated at home, definitely makes that monologue,
Oh yeah, we got time on our hands.
Grow a lot. Everybody's got time and everyone's got an opinion right now. So
absolutely.
But look, it's been really great chopping it up with you. It's been good getting to know you a little bit. I mean, I knew your name, like I said, from when I was at Syracuse back in the day. But I look forward to seeing what you have next. And it seems like you've really used basketball to open up doors for you, and you're taking advantage of that. And that's very commendable.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you having me, man. Hopefully we'll be able to chop it up soon, man.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk soon.
All right, man. Take care.
All right.
Peace.
Thank you.